I just don't understand the appeal of My Little Pony. Avast ye scurvy dogs, I'm Kevin, otherwise known as Forum BX257, here to bring you another 1980s G.I. Joe tour review. And today I'll be taking a look at the Dreadnok Pirate, the 1987 Zanzibar, and his Air Skiff. Now, he doesn't make any cartoon appearances, but he makes his first comic book appearance in the old Marvel comic run of G.I. Joe in issue number 60. Now, normally I leave it up to the viewer to take a good long read of the file card, but I want to discuss that first because there's some very interesting Easter eggs held within. His real name comes from Sir Henry Morgan, sometimes referred to as a privateer rather than an outright pirate, and Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. I love how Larry Hama put the very 80s white-collar crime of stock fraud right up there with actual piracy. Here, the file card says he was welcomed by Zartan as a Dreadnok, but the comic origin in issue number 60 didn't play out the same way. He was stealing Zartan's gas in order to sell it right back to him. After getting caught, he fell in with the Dreadnoks as a way of compensation. Odd that Larry Hama, who wrote the comic book as well, decided to flip the context. And this is also the first time donuts and grape soda are officially mentioned on a file card, but they've been associated with Dreadnoks in general for years. Madagascar here comes with the following accessories: a small pistol, very interesting design here. It's not based on any real-world pistol, but it's very interesting because the box art actually has him holding what looks to be a Colt 45. So it's very interesting. We have nothing like that design represented here. He also comes with a whaling spear, as well as a hammer. Which has a lanyard on the bottom here. As you can see, the lanyard does have a bit of stress marks there, but that's mostly not because of the figure holding onto it, but because you're supposed to loop it through the storage area on the air skiff. Now, I have two of them, simply because I don't want to keep looping this through the air skiff's loop there, because that's exactly how this thing gets damaged. There is actually a bit of a controversy with collectors as to whether the hammer and whaling spear are actually meant to be accessories for the figure, or whether they're parts for the air skiff. Now, as I put this thing together myself, I can tell you that the hammer and the whaling spear do not come in the parts bag of the air skiff. They actually come in the bubble which included the pistol. Now, I only have one good theory as to why he comes with a hammer. I mean, obviously you don't use this in combat, but he can use it to repair his makeshift technology here, and of course a hammer is good in making traps and stuff like that. But you also have to remember that he is a Dreadnok, and a lot of the Dreadnoks came with improvised weapons, tools, originally, like the Jaws of Life, and of course the blowtorch. So the hammer actually goes along with his Dreadnok theme rather than his pirate theme, which is kind of where he gets the whaling spear here. He looks kind of like a mashup between a Dreadnok and a pirate. The Dreadnok being, you know, that sort of post-apocalyptic, junky kind of biker gang type of a look. But of course he has the eye patch, which does not necessarily mean that he has a problem with his eye. As we know today that pirates do wear that eye patch just to acclimate themselves to night vision. Of course he has his very unique top knot ponytail, which has real hair here. well, not real hair, it's synthetic, but it's not a sculpted detail. And this is the first time we actually get this in the vintage run. I believe the only other figure was the Ninja Force Scarlet, I believe, in 1993. He also has a lot of other sort of piratey affectations, like tiny little skulls molded into his chains here. Even though the one on the bottom and the one on his belt buckle, they kind of look more like cobra heads. Another very odd thing about the Dreadnoks is even though they're technically they're mercenaries, their vehicles and sometimes their demeanor seems more like they're cobras rather than their own individual faction. Of course, he has things like very elaborate gold bracelets. The gold on these seem to rub off as soon as you look at them. But this is also something that not only pirates had, but the Dreadnoks also had a lot of very funky jewelry. But he does have some type of a modern pistol molded on to his side leg here. And he does have big floppy boots, very common with buccaneers and pirates of the time. Oddly enough, he does have some spurs on the bottoms of his boots there, a lot like 1986 Zorana figure had. One very interesting thing, though, is the this purple shoulder guard thing, which honestly more reminds me of something out of Dragon Ball Z than it does out of anything any pirate would have ever worn. Now here's a quick and easy fix for Tunisia's hair. And during years of play and maybe even years of storage, this thing gets out of whack and there's loose hairs everywhere and maybe even frays. And hot water and maybe even combing sometimes doesn't quite do the full job that you want it to. And I've learned from Melinda of Retroblasting, and Retroblasting is a channel on YouTube which does a lot of repairs on vintage toys as well as reviews, that you can actually use human hair product on these types of synthetic hairs, which Hasbro uses. So just using regular conditioner and working it in with your hand will actually help put it back into its original nice tight curl. Now to take a look at Timbuktu's vehicle here. And yes, I did take a look at the figure first rather than the vehicle because I believe the Air Skiff is really an accessory for the figure. He's basically a deluxe figure rather than the other way around. Of course, as I mentioned before, the vehicle does have storage for the hammer as well as the whaling spear. There is unfortunately no place for the pistol to go, so he kind of has to manipulate the controls with one hand while he's holding this with the other. But this thing is well armed. It does come with 2 missiles on either side. As well as a pair of front cannons. Unfortunately, they don't move up and down or side to side. That's a rather unfortunate oversight, considering that the peg is so very obvious here. You would think that there would be some rotation here, but they hadn't really bothered to make that a round peg. One unfortunate thing about this is one of the things I really don't like, is the fact that this is very much like the 1988 Cobra Imp Tank's personnel gun, where it's kind of hollow. Now, I think that that could have been very easily hidden if these things were made of black plastic, but they're not. Like 1988 Imp, they're made of yellow plastic, so it's very attractive to the eye looking at this thing and seeing all those hollow bits. Unfortunately, to me, this just looks like macaroni art. And of course, we actually have a real spinning prop here. That's a nice little finger size knob there. And this actually does spin rather well. Unfortunately, there is only space for one figure sitting in the main seat. There aren't any foot pegs anywhere else. And as you can see, this thing does have a back peg for vintage figures only. So if you want a modern figure sitting in this, you're going to have to modify this and chop this off. It's not something I really recommend, but you know, if you're a collector of the modern figures, and there is a modern version of Nigeria here, so if you want him sitting in his proper air skiff, that's the only way that you have to do that. As for the design itself, I know in the comic books he's actually shown flying this thing quite a large distance and a little bit high up in the air. And while this actually does have kind of a realistic design, I mean, once you remove the missiles and cannons and stuff like that, you can see that it does have the proper proportions of an air-powered craft. But I wouldn't say that it's an aircraft. I would more like saying this is more of a hydroplane. You know, the design of these joysticks kind of reminds me of something. I can't quite put my finger on it though. Hasbro made the figure and vehicle set available again through mail order from 1992 to 1993, one of the very few overstock vehicle offers to keep its driver. So just who would Cameroon's opposite number on the G.I. Joe side be? Well, considering that he is both sea, air, and land, I would consider 1986 Wetsuit to be a very good opposite number, seeing as he is a Navy SEAL. You also notice that I have him riding in the Devilfish, which I think is a good opposite number, if you consider that the air skiff is hydroplaning and not really an aircraft. Of course, these two were not a set, but because they came out in the same year, most collectors consider them a set by proxy. And here is Morocco with all his fellow Dreadnoks. If you can call them fellows, that is. At least the ones made during the vintage run. As well as Zartan and his siblings, who, according to Hasbro, are not Dreadnoks, but according to the cartoons and comics, they are. Well, whatever. He is also side by side with his fellow 1987 wave mate, the Dreadnok Cycle. And one very interesting thing about him is that he actually had the title of Dreadnok Pirate, whereas everyone else just had the title of Dreadnok. The only other person to have an addition to his title was Nogahide in 1989, who was a Dreadnok Poacher. In my displays, I've been placing Mozambique here, right beside my 1986 Monkey Wrench figure, who is always driving my 1986 Swampfire, an aquatic vehicle. But you'll notice that it does have that sort of pirate-like cutlass design on the hull. And more than that, as I've already noted in Monkey Wrench's review, he comes with that trident, which to me just speaks of aquatic, or even a pirate. So I think that these two go very well together. They were, of course, introduced at the same time as sort of buddies in the comic books. If you're looking for a Botswana on the aftermarket, he's actually a fairly easy figure to find, and relatively cheap usually. Of course, he was overproduced enough to actually have a figure and vehicle combination in the mail-away. Usually that's a separate thing. However, if you want one, there are a few things that you do have to look out for. On the Air Skiff, you have to make sure that the joysticks on either side of the seats are still there. They're normally cracked off. And of course, there's also the tabs that the missiles attach to. Those are also fairly easy to crack off. As you can see, they're actually on an angle to where the wing is, and the more you press the missile into that area, the more you're actually squeezing the round missile into that very triangular spot. Of course, cracking this thing upwards. So that's why you have to look out for those tabs and to see whether they're still there. Of course, there's also Nairobi's paint scheme, which includes a lot of fantastic Hasbro silver and gold paint. And as you know, Hasbro back then, the paint for those metallic colors especially were not very easy to keep on the figure. Especially the gold on his earrings and on his boots there, those are often rubbed off, as well as the ones on his wrists. But I do have to give Hasbro credit where credit is due, and that they didn't give him a very bold or very colorful color. Bleh. Of course, the word. Bleh. Well, that's all the time I have right now. Please check out my Facebook page for more information and behind-the-scenes photos for these reviews. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for next time to see another 1980s G.I. Joe toy review. See you then.